Gotham Knights was a game that I kind of avoided playing for the longest time. Due to the lack of positive reception, it was generally received as a mediocre slash possibly a good game. So for the longest time, I didn't really see myself wanting to play this. But I finally went through, I finally played through Gotham Knights, and I want to make a couple things clear before I go into this video. First things first, I played the entire story as one character and one character only, and that was Red Hood. Simply because of the fact that I did not want to get used to one character and then have to get used to a different character, because I know each character possesses different capabilities. I didn't want to have to deal with all that, so I just picked one. I picked Red Hood, and that's pretty much all I have to say on that. But also, I did not complete any sort of side missions. If you want me to make a video in the future talking about the Gotham Knights side missions, I can absolutely do that. Just let me know down in the comments below. But in today's video, I'm going to be posing the question, is Gotham Knights any good? Now, the way I'm going to be breaking this down is into two separate categories, the story and the combat slash stealth. And I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to try not to make too many comparisons to the Batman Arkham series. However, seeing as those games came out way before Gotham Knights, and there's going to be some comparisons to be made, especially when it comes to, the characters, the combat, the overall story modes in this game, I think it's going to be some comparisons to be made. I'm going to not try to compare it too much, but there being such a similar style game, I'm going to have to draw comparisons, especially from Batman Arkham Knight when it comes to the combat and stealth. And when it comes to the story, I can kind of compare it to all four of the Batman Arkham games in some sort of capacity. So, without wasting any more of your time, let's get into the video. I'm going to start off with the actual story mode, because in my opinion, the story mode is the most important thing. Without the story, if it's just good gameplay, then not as many people are going to like it, as seen in Batman Arkham Knight. But, talking about the actual story mode in this game, I thought it was a good, solid story. I thought it was pretty decent overall, at least. I will say, it is a bit of a slow start, right? Despite the fact that Bruce Wayne dies at the very beginning of the game, outside of that, not a lot happens for the first about 4 to 5 chapters-ish. I would say about 4 chapters-ish, right? Until we figure out who is the head of the Court of Owls. Because that's what we're really trying to figure out, right? Figuring out the court has something to do with the death of Kirk Langstrom. So we need to figure out who is the head of the Court of Owls, which turns out to be Jacob Kane. Which, in hindsight, was pretty obvious, considering the fact that there was nobody outside of the Belfry besides Jacob Kane that was kind of showcased in some sort of high regard who had connections to Bruce Wayne, that person being Jacob Kane. So in hindsight, yeah, it does seem kind of obvious he would have been the head of the court, but regardless, it doesn't exactly make it easy to catch him. But like I said, the story doesn't really get going until after the first 4 to 5 chapters, right? It wants to ease your way into the world, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. However, the only negative you could draw from that is if you take too long to, bring a character into the universe, if you take too long to actually make someone interested in the story, then you might just lose people's interest altogether and they might just want to stop playing the game. But for those of us who have patience and are willing to take our time and play the full game through, yes, it was absolutely worth the wait. And like I mentioned before with Jacob Kane and being the head of the court and all that, the story doesn't really pick up until he gets shot by Talia al Ghul, where it kind of turns out that this game turns out to be more about the League of Assassins, as it does turn out to be the Court of Owls, which was a little bit disappointing to me, I gotta be honest, mostly because we dealt with the League of Assassins in the Batman Arkham universe. We did not deal with the Court of Owls in that franchise, so I wanted to mix it up, have us deal with the Court of Owls, which a good chunk of the game does have us revolve around. But what it really turns out is the entire time that the Court of Owls is essentially just kind of wimps in comparison to the League. The League is literally so much better than the Court. The Court's got nothing on the League. And so that kind of makes it seem like the League is actually running Gotham, and the League are who we have to actually stop. The one thing I definitely will give Gotham Knights in regards to the story is that some of the location pieces in this game were just absolutely gorgeous, right? Gotham City in itself looks absolutely good to travel around. And actually the set pieces when it came to going underground to deal with the court, or if we're dealing with the League, or whatever we're dealing with, a lot of the underground pieces in particular were extremely well done. And it kind of had that creepy aura to it that they wanted it to have. But it also was very, very beautifully well done and very well put together. And I have a feeling that a lot of the efforts in this game went towards making a beautiful inner level design, I guess you could call it. That's what it felt like to me, at least. And, going underground, dealing with the court, like I mentioned, it was all very, very well and good. I really did enjoy the levels. I really did enjoy the actual look and the scenery surrounding me throughout the course of the game. And what I will say is when it comes to the big reveal at the end, that Bruce is still alive and he's been brought back to life by way of the Lazarus Pit, was honestly a huge shock to me. I did not see that one coming. However, I did know that when I saw him that there's just no way that he was going to get out of that cave alive. I knew that he was going to perish before we exited the cave. I knew we were going to have to take on Bruce in a fight once I saw that Talia was kind of, manipulating him. And then I knew we were going to have to take on Talia after. Although I thought Talia was actually going to be the one to take Bruce out. I didn't realize that, he was going to end up ending his own life in an explosion. To me, that part doesn't necessarily make the most amount of sense, but it is what it is. I knew Bruce wasn't going to get out of there alive. It was kind of a mixed feeling because he died at the start of the game, so just to bring him back, to just take him away from us again, it was kind of a bit sad. To be honest, I was a bit sad it happened, but I understand why it happened, because this game's about, Red Hood, Batgirl, Robin, Nightwing. It's about those four coming into their own and proving that they can protect Gotham without someone like Batman by their side. And I think that's what this game is just about, right? It's not about the Court of Owls. It's not about proving how dangerous the Lazarus Pit is. We already know how dangerous those two groups of people are. We already know how dangerous the Lazarus Pit is, right? If we played the Arkham games, we understand what the Lazarus Pit can do. But it's about these four coming into their own and proving that they can defend themselves against the world and defend Gotham without Batman being there, that they're more than just side characters. And I thought that was a really, really nice touch. And this game did Batman's death a lot better than Suicide Squad did. I don't even want to get into that, actually. And just to briefly touch on the characters in this game, I thought that their personalities were really well translated into this, because I think that sometimes the games kind of miss the point that the characters themselves have to be interesting. I think that all four superheroes in this game were perpetrated very well and very realistic to the personalities that you get, right? With Red Hood, you kind of get that tough, brooding, silent type of guy. Nightwing, kind of a talkative, charismatic trash talker, someone who's got a loud mouth. Robin, kind of the shy, nerdy type of fella, and, Batgirl, also very nerdy type, but not as shy as someone like a Robin. I thought the game did a really good job of showcasing their personalities very well to how they are and other iterations of the character. But with that being said, I didn't find the cutscenes in this game to be very fulfilling. I don't know what it was. Something just felt weird in the interactions. It almost didn't feel natural. Like, there was long pauses between dialogue lines. It just felt kind of weird and awkward to me. Maybe I'm the only one who noticed that, but that's like my only complaint within the cutscenes of this game. Now, with that being said, is the story mode any good? I would say it's decent. It's not the best thing in the world. It's very slow paced. It takes a while for it to get going. So if you have patience to wait, then yes, absolutely, dive into this. And what I will say is that the highlights of this game are very, very high, right? Jacob Kane being revealed as the head of the court is kind of like small potatoes. Batman dying at the very beginning of the game, having it revealed he's still alive at the end of the game, Jacob Kane getting shot by Talia al Ghul, having to defeat Talia al Ghul, and having to find out she was actually still with the League the entire time. These highlights are very, very good, and you could probably say that I'm just not very observant, or you could say that I'm very naive, but a lot of this stuff I didn't see coming. I didn't know that Talia would still be with the League. I didn't know that Bruce was still going to be alive. Jacob Kane being part of the court wasn't the most surprising thing, but it was still a nice little plot twist that I did enjoy. So with that being said, those are the few highlights of the game, and everything else kind of just felt a bit slow-paced, and that's not necessarily a bad thing if you're just trying to enjoy a fun game and an overall world experience. So, out of 10, I'd probably give the story a good 6.5, 7 out of 10-ish. I think it was good, but I think that there are potential dialogue improvements and such that need to be made going into the future. And like I mentioned before, the world design is absolutely beautiful. The levels were done extremely well. I even like the crime scene investigation and the puzzles that went into this game. I felt like a real genius solving those. So yeah, I'd give it a solid 7 out of 10. Now, this is where I'm going to get a little bit more. I don't want to say negative, but it's kind of the only word I could use to describe it. Talking about the combat in this game, it's not the worst thing in the world, right? It still has that free flow combat system, something similar to what the Batman Arkham series had. But I really do have to be very critical of certain aspects of the combat in this game. First of all, it is very, very repetitive. Now, you could say the same thing in the Batman Arkham games, but the Batman Arkham combat flowed a lot better. There was more gadgets at your disposal to use. There was actually, like, a system with, the actual free flow and your combat score and all that. This just didn't feel like it had any sort of pacing to it. It kind of felt like you just kind of had to strike as you can. And as well as the fact that it felt a lot more spammy than something in comparison to, like, the Batman Arkham universe. Yes, in the Arkham games, you do spam at times, but I would argue that the times where you have to counter or avoid strikes is a lot less obvious than when Gotham Knights is doing it, right? When Gotham Knight characters, when the NPCs are coming at you to strike, you have a solid, 3 seconds to get out of the way. It is a very, very long time. Very, very obvious. And it does have the right indicator over top to tell you that the enemy is about to strike, which the Arkham games have too. I'm not criticizing having the indicator as much, such as it's more about how long you have to avoid such strikes, and it kind of just becomes a little bit boring and obvious after a while. And my other complaint with the combat, the fights are just way too long. Like, I'm just going to say it straight up. The fights are way too long, right? The Batman Arkham universe, those combat sequences, they last like a minute, maybe two. Sometimes I'd find myself in fights that could last as long as up to 4 minutes. Now, that doesn't sound like a big disparity, but in a combat scenario where you're playing as a superhero and, you have these finishers and stuff that should be able to take out your enemy's health, it just takes really, really long. However, that is essentially where my complaints end. What I will say is that the striking in this game is relatively decent. I did like the finishers that came in this game, and I was initially not too happy with the enemy types, very, very specific ones, because it kind of tied into how long the actual combat sections went on. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought that does add some difficulty to an extent, depending on the enemy type that you were dealing with. I did like the switch up from just basic NPC type thugs, or even just big guys that you had to deal with throughout the course of the game. I like the idea of Talons, the Talon Guards, or whatever they were called, the really, really big guys. The League of Assassins, I guess you could call them, even though I wasn't a big fan of them in the beginning because they're just so annoying to take on, because every time you go to hit them, they just straight up disappear. They just straight up peace out and just come back to hit you. It was annoying at first until you kind of start to get used to it. Then it kind of becomes a bit better. You kind of come to appreciate the difficulty of it. And even though that does make the combat sections longer, they didn't have an absurd amount of health unlike some, NPC types of this game. That was my biggest issue, was the health bar and how much it took to actually take them out. And just any type of enemy, right? That was the most frustrating part to me about this game. But the actual combat sections with the challenginess in it of itself, I thought was pretty decent. And as the game went on, you start to get better as you do with any other game. My only issue with these type of, upgrading the NPCs is that they only have 1 or 2 different moves. And then it's just the same thing, rinse and repeat, so you kind of get the timing down. I kind of wish that they would throw multiple different attacks at you. There's 5, 6, 7, 8 different things that they could throw at you, just so you don't get too used to the same sort of pattern and routine over and over and over again. However, I can appreciate the different enemy types you have to face throughout the course of the game. Whether it's League of Assassins, you can be taking on the court, you can be taking on random thugs in the streets. I forget some of the names of the types of thugs, but you know exactly who I'm referring to. I did like that there was different enemy types depending on what group of people you're fighting, whether it was the freaks or whoever. I did think that was a really good switch up. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to complain anymore, but that was a lie. I'm going to complain again for a second. The second biggest issue I have in this game's combat, besides the fact that the fights are extremely long and can get kind of boring, is the lack of overall stealth, right? This is an issue that we never had in the Batman Arkham universe. Even in Batman Arkham Asylum, that was made in 2009, 13 years before the release of Gotham Knights. This is kind of a similar issue I had in the Spider-Man games, was when you had armed thugs, even though they all had guns, they wouldn't just all shoot you at once like a normal thug would if they were actually trying to kill you. Instead, we just had one aim at you, and you dodge, and you might dodge a second time. That's about it. And in the Arkham universe, if thugs spot you with guns, they're going to shoot you until you are dead. And it's very hard to get away, and it's a lot more challenging to deal with in comparison to Gotham Knights, where it kind of just feels like, we're going to shoot once every 30 seconds, or whenever we realistically feel like it. Which, speaking of the super long fights in this game, I know that some people are probably going to say that you have the little health booster that you can just shoot yourself some health whenever you're running low, and that's why the fights are so long. Well, to fix this problem, how about everybody has an equal amount of health? I didn't necessarily like the whole level system where, as the game goes on, the enemy types are a higher level and have more health. I think that that's a bit silly, because that would indicate that these people themselves are not actually like human, that they turn into some sort of superhuman and they just naturally get more health as the game goes on. But I also don't think you should be able to just shoot yourself with health whenever you feel like it, because that kind of just negates the purpose. Again, not to compare it too much to the Batman Arkham series, but they kind of kept it realistic, where instead of throughout the course of the game, the enemies necessarily got more health, you just got dealt with new enemy types. It wasn't necessarily that they had more health or less health, unless they were designed to have more health if they were bigger enemies. That I can understand, but with a normal thug, the health level should remain consistent throughout the course of the game. Maybe you should add more of them, or add new enemy types instead, which the game did do that. They did add more enemy types throughout the course of the game, but my issue with that is it just doesn't seem very realistic to me. And maybe it's a superhero game, maybe I'm being nitpicky and it's not meant to be realistic, but that's just my personal opinion. So with all that being said, is Gotham Knights a good game? Well, I would say yes. This is a very good game when it comes to a story mode. Despite the fact it is a bit slower paced, that to me isn't necessarily the biggest deal in the world. However, if you're going to come to this game with the expectation to have AAA level gameplay, I would perhaps pass on this one, because this is probably not for you. If you're not someone who cares too much about the story, if you prefer the actual combat sequences, I'd rather just go play the Batman Arkham games personally. But if you want a decent, engaging story with something that isn't just about Batman and Joker, and instead involves side characters throughout the course of the Batman universe, then yes, I would absolutely encourage you to give this game a playthrough. And it's been a few years since this game's come out, but even now, it's still not a bad game, which kind of makes me pose the question, was this game just behind the times? Was it a little bit too aged even when it was released for its own good? Or were the Batman Arkham games just that good and that far ahead of its time? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to leave a thumbs up, make sure to subscribe for more content, and let me know what game you guys want me to review next.